In Nigeria, a Rivers State High Court has issued a 7-day interim injunction restraining the State House of Assembly from sending any impeachment-related correspondence to the Chief Judge. The order also bars the Chief Judge from receiving or acting on any request to form an impeachment panel against Governor Siminalayi Fubara and his deputy, Professor Ngozi Odu. The ruling came on Friday as the Assembly vowed to continue its impeachment push, alleging gross misconduct. Four lawmakers who had earlier called for dialogue reversed their stance, accusing the governor of showing no remorse. Now, the Assembly failed to reconvene on Thursday amid rumors of a plot to impeach the Speaker. Our case has been adjourned to January 23rd. Joining us now for an analysis of the crisis in Rivers State is a public affairs analyst, Gospar Egules. Good to have you with us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure joining you.
Very good. Now, Godspower, the impression being created right now is that the State House of Assembly wants to run Rivers, by serving impeachment notice to the governor and his deputy at the same time. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, quickly, let me state that impeachment proceedings is a constitutional provision as stated in Section 188 of the Constitution. And it's one of the legislative businesses that the House of Assembly carry out, to checkmate excesses of the executive. Ours is a constitutional democracy, and that we have three arms of government. Now, in those three arms of government, we have checks and balances. The judiciary checks the executive checks the judiciary and the legislature also perform oversight functions on the executive and the judiciary. So, in terms of checkmating the excesses of the executive, the legislature always comes to play to check if public funds, or the executive have been involved in grounds of gross misconduct. So, while those grounds of gross misconduct are alleged against the executive, the legislature can carry out impeachment proceedings pursuant to Section 188 of the Constitution.
But looking at this injunction that has been granted by the court, what is the implication, especially looking at the impeachment process against the governor and his deputy?
Well, I know that, like I said, as a constitutional democracy, so every actions of the three arms of government must be dictated by the provisions of the Constitution. I also know that Section 188 sub 10, oust the jurisdiction of courts to determine any matter with respect to impeachment proceedings of a governor and deputy governor. I also know that judiciary, the Court of Appeal, has given vent to the provisions of Section 188 sub 10 in the case of Aberibe versus the Abia State House of Assembly, where the Court of Appeal stated that no court should entertain any matter with respect to impeachment proceedings. But you see, it calls to fall, the fact that members of the judiciary must always, at every point in time, rise to the occasion to protect not just the provisions of the Constitution, but the sanctity of our polity. So for me, I hold this view that if the Constitution has provided that no court should entertain a matter at this point in time, then we should allow a free flow of legislative business, the same way we should allow a free flow of judicial business and indeed executive business. You see, no arm of government, especially the judiciary, should truncate the other arm of government. For instance, nobody should go to court to tell the executive, don't perform executive functions. Nobody too should go to court to tell the legislature, don't perform legislative functions. Nobody should go to court to tell the judiciary, don't perform judicial functions. You see, if we have separation of power, each arm of government performing within the limits of constitutionally provided provisions, I don't think we would get to a point where we will have a restraining order to stop the legislature from performing their functions.
All right. Despite this restraining order by the court currently, the State House of Assembly is still pushing ahead with the impeachment proceedings. So what would be the legal grounds for that to take place?
Well, at the moment, the buck is still in the buck stops now at the CJ's office, because if you take a look at the impeachment proceedings, at some point it will move from what the House of Assembly has done, which is serving impeachment notice to the executive, in this particular case in contest, the governor and the deputy governor. Then it moves to constitution of a 7-man panel. So, but we'll see what the CJ at the moment has not made any reaction. So, for those of us who are constitutional lawyers and public affairs analysts, we hope to see what the CJ will do in the coming days. Right now, the Rivers State Judiciary hadn't made any official pronouncement with respect to the court proceedings and the reception of the notice from the House of Assembly to set up the 7-man panel. So let's see how it pans out.
Well, seeing that you are also a legal practitioner, what do you think, or what would happen if eventually the Chief Judge receives an impeachment notice despite the injunction, the court injunction?
Well, at this point, there are varied opinions with respect to what has happened. I know there are people who say no matter how illegal a court judgment is, it should be observed until it is set aside. But only to also state that it's an interim order, and I know there is a motion attached to that interim order, which will be heard on the next court date, where the governor will now need, to make his proper request why such an order should move from an interim injunction to an interlocutory injunction. When you file an interim ex parte application like this, you would always attach an interlocutory application. So I think the next thing would be how the governor will be able to justify his actions in getting that interim order so that the court will make that order interlocutory.
All right, Gaspar, apart from being a lawyer, you're also a resident in Rivers State, of course. Let me just ask you, what was the relevance of a state of emergency that we had sometime last year and the federal government intervention, as it were, if the major issues are still lingering and are still there, for peace to reign in a Rivers State? So, do you foresee another intervention at this rate if most of all these issues have not been addressed?
I would speak as a neutral mind. If you go and ask the political actors, both political blocs will tell you that the state of emergency was relevant at that point. I have seen statements made by those who belong to the former governor's bloc and the current governor's bloc. And I've heard statements made by the governor justifying the state of emergency. Issues can be political, and they can dovetail from being political issues to security issues. And when you have security issues that would want to fragment, parts of a nation or cause upheaval, the Constitution, by virtue of Section 305, allows the president to declare a state of emergency. So, but at this point, what we still have is a political issue. I do not think that we have moved to a security issue. It's still political. So I do not foresee a state of emergency being declared again in Rivers State, because at the moment we have political issues. If all the actors realize that these political issues hovers within the context of politics and law, I'm sure we will not get to the point where we now have to get to security concerns. There
were reports earlier that there were some indications that President Tinubu had a meeting with the Minister of the FCT, Nyesom Wike, and the Governor of Rivers State, Fubara. That's recently. What significance do you think that would have? It was said to have been held outside the country, and of course, it was in line of this whole crisis in the state. What significance do you think that would have, especially on the recent impeachment proceedings?
Well, these are political actors, and like I said before, the issue hovers around politics and law. Well, politicians are allowed to meet. If they meet and resolve their issues, fine. But where they don't resolve those issues, I'm sure the respective parties will reserve their rights to continue in their own respective move. So if there was, I'm not aware, and I usually do not want to speak on political issues. I like staying on law. So, but these are politicians, and politicians will always play politics. And in the course of such politics, there will be need for them to meet. So whatever grievances both parties have, if they meet, I'm sure they'll be able to resolve those grievances. But where they are unable to meet, both will be left to no option but to exercise their rights as provided in the Constitution.